Hello everyone, welcome to another podcast. Me, Ben Lister, here yet again. Just a quick update, this is my interview with Paul Newman, episode 32 of the Chatbox podcast, so here it is. Hello and welcome to another Chatterbox podcast. It's episode 32. How are you doing today? Right, let's crack on. As you know, each week I have a guest to talk about their career. So let's crack on with this week's guest. It's legendary broadcaster Paul Newman. Hello, Paul. How are you?
Hi, Ben. I think more leg end than legend, but I'll run with it for the moment.
How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you.
That's good. 5 questions about radio and broadcasting, if that's okay with you.
Do I get a T-shirt if I get them all right?
You're not getting £1 million because that's Chris Tarrant's job.
Well, no, a T-shirt will do, not 1 million.
All right, then maybe, who knows? If that's okay with you.
Yeah, you go for it. Crack on.
You ready to rumble in the jungle?
Absolutely.
Let's just go for it. Question 1. Where did you start your broadcast career?
Professionally, I started at Fox FM, which had just launched across Oxfordshire back in 1989. But I suppose my very first broadcast experience would be hospital radio. And that was way back when I was about 18 years old, I suppose I might have been. And that was at Heatherwood Radio in Ascot.
Wow, what a start to your career. Question 2. Who were your inspirations in broadcasting growing up?
Oh, gosh. Well, for me personally, living Radio 1 throughout the whole of the 1970s as a budding teenager, and well, I was well and truly a teenager by the end of the 1970s, and Tony Blackburn on mid-mornings, and Noel Edmonds on the breakfast show, and all those lovely jam jingles, so I would have to say it was Noel and Tony Blackburn, and then, I guess other guys like Paul Burnett as well. So that was what I grew up on. And then a little bit of local radio. So Roger Scott on Capital. I used to give him a good listen when I was a kid. And there were other presenters across the Midlands at BRMB and Beacon Radio 303. So I had a good all-round grounding, really, of some great talent that was around in those days.
Yeah, brilliant. And it's good that you've got different people. And also, did you like John Peel and Bruno Brooks on Radio 1 as well?
I was never a John Peel fan. I think the reason was I just couldn't stand the music that he played, because I totally got what he was trying to do. He was a cause, wasn't he, for promoting new artists that nobody had ever heard of. And some of them made it very big off the back of the publicity that John Peel gave them. But I found his humor brilliantly infectious, just sitting there with his mug of cocoa and his dressing gown on late at night. But I never got into the music. With Bruno, consummate professional, probably, dare I say, where Foxy got his style for the top 40. Perhaps, maybe I'm wrong, but I just thought that Bruno really set the trend for tight top 40 chart radio. I just thought he was brilliant the way he put it all together.
And they were in competition for a while.
Yes, exactly. That must have been a fun fight.
I wonder who'd have won.
Oh, that's a tough one. I say, being a good friend of Foxy's now, I can't say too much. But they're both cracking guys and brilliantly talented, so I wouldn't like to pick a winner.
I'd have just gone with a draw, and they both just had a bottle of whiskey and chatted about music of past times.
Mm.
And also, it's good that they've both got the different styles as well.
Yeah, one of my favorite clips, actually, and you can find it on YouTube if you haven't seen it already, is where, and I remember it going out live on BBC One at the time, back in the late 80s, when Radio 1 got their first jingle package on CD, and Terry Wogan, I think it was actually Radio 1's 20th or 21st birthday, and Terry Wogan's chat show on BBC One linked up with Mike Smith in the studios, and there was Bruno Brooks sitting there behind the mixing desk, and he was putting these jingles on the CD, and they were dancing to the jingles in the studio. I think Janice Long was in there as well. And that's a favorite clip of mine. And what I love is Bruno's love for radio and just making it all sound tight and bright, you know, just like Tony Blackburn.
He was friends with Tony Blackburn.
Yeah, well, Tony's touched a lot of our hearts over the years, hasn't he, really?
Yeah, it's a shame. I'm glad the BBC rehired him, if I'm honest with you.
Well, yeah, I mean, justice had to be done, didn't it, really? So to have him pushed to one side over something that was insubstantial, I think the least they could do is bring him back in. I still think they should have reinstated him on the Pick of the Pops show, though. I think he did a better job than Paul Gambaccini. You know, even if Paul didn't need to have an assistant to actually talk about the music, but I still think that he's a great presenter, Tony. He's got a great sense of rhythm.
He got removed from. Sorry. And also, I read somewhere, I was watching a Piers Morgan life stories of Tony Blackburn. He got removed from a radio station for playing a Cliff Richard album.
Yeah, I remember watching that Piers Morgan program. Yeah, but he's a lovely chap. He turned up. I was doing a road show across the South Coast for Capital Gold South, run by Kevin King, as we talked about before we started this little chat. And he turned up with Paul Burnett and Graham Dean. I've put the picture actually on my Facebook thread. And he turned up and I interviewed him briefly. And one thing I remember about him is he crashed the vocal of the Four Tops song that we played. But lovely guy and consummate professional at all times, of course.
Wow, what a legend. And also I remember, yeah, he just threw the last warning from the radio station on the Piers Morgan interview in the bin, I think.
Wouldn't surprise me.
And then he just played the Cliff Richard album.
I don't know what that was all about, do you? Where radio stations were suddenly banned from playing Cliff Richard records. And then you had new internet radio stations like United DJs run by Tony Prince that I got involved with in 2018. That's only just gone off the air for good. And we were all saying, look, come and listen to us because we're not afraid to play Cliff Richard records. And we suddenly had an army of listeners that were big Cliff Richard fans for that reason and none other.
The only reason they reinstated Tony Blackburn was because the fans had a massive outcry and they refused to listen to that station. So the person just said, we'll have to reinstate Tony Blackburn because we're losing listeners.
Yeah. Well, yeah, fans can have a lot to do with decisions that are made, but sadly, they don't have enough influence in my book, because if they did have more influence, then we would have a different sounding Radio 2 to what we have now.
Yeah. Ken Bruce is brilliant on Radio 2 as well.
He is, but I'm not sure he's particularly comfortable with playing songs that are only 20 to 15 years old. I think he's much more comfortable at his age playing music that we all love in our generation, you know, which is like 60s, 70s, 80s, bit of 90s hits. And I get that Radio 2, as we move on through the decades, it becomes harder for Radio 2 to cover that footprint of music. But I still think that we need to have a mainstay BBC station that covers those classic hits. And I think playing stuff that isn't so dissimilar to Radio 1 today is not quite where they need to be. I still think they should be slightly older in their music format like they were.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. And also there's a lot of great fit, and the world's changed at the moment, as we know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And question 3, what is your favorite part about the job?
Well, when I was on FM and AM commercial radio, local and regional radio, you know, like, as I say, Capital across the South Coast, BRMB, Chiltern, Fox, the computer chose the music that I played, and I was there, and I loved the technology, and I loved the jingles and everything else, but I was kind of just slotting in me between the rest of the show that was kind of put together for me. It was sort of, I was there as part of the framework of the show, if you like. What I love, what I've learned to love since leaving all that behind and doing my own stuff on today's radio stations, but doing it from home, is that I do a show from a blank sheet of paper, and I create something that, you know, and I bring in features, and some of them are successful, some of them I drop because maybe the listener got bored or tired with them or whatever. But at the end of the day, I steer the music and I steer the format of the show. And that's actually what gives me the biggest thrill. It's sharing my choice of music or my input of my features of the show and getting getting the feedback from the listeners. Okay. So I think that's actually my favorite part of the job. Definitely.
Yeah. And we'll get on to question 4. Now, how has COVID affected your life and line of work?
Okay, there's 2 things with this. So first of all, COVID didn't do me any favors with my ears, because I guess I largely have a boss jock style. So I like to have the headphones quite loud so I can hear my voice over and above the music. And so my ears took a real hammering about a year ago. I was doing some extra shows, like, live in lockdown shows, for people who were in lockdown. I said, look, let's have a couple of extra shows that we'll do during the week. And people were listening to them, and it did my reputation no harm at all, because I was getting more and more listeners. But so my ears took a bit of a bashing around May, June last year, and I suddenly went a bit deaf in my left ear, and I haven't seemed to have recovered from that yet. So the legacy of COVID, I've gone a bit more deaf than I was, but I've picked up some more listeners in the process.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's good. And how did you feel over the pandemic?
Well, the COVID itself came very close to home, which wasn't very pleasant. So there were people in the family isolating, but we were careful and got through it. Obviously, I feel very sorry for those that have lost loved ones. I've lost a couple of family members last year, although they were just old, an aunt and an uncle, just very old, not necessarily went by COVID, but COVID did affect them, because when they were in care, family couldn't go and see them as you would normally have expected, to be around somebody's bedside when they are, in their final throes. So I think that COVID has affected lots of different families for that reason, that where they couldn't be with their loved ones at the most critical time at the end of their life. So I feel really sorry about that.
Yeah. And the last question on my list, what advice would you give to young aspiring broadcasters who are starting out and who are maybe listening to this podcast in the future?
Well, if anybody is still listening and haven't fallen asleep. So what I would say is, just thinking about when I started out, and I always had a real love for radio. It wasn't just about the music that I heard. It was about the jingles. It was about the personality and what they said on the radio. And it was also about the technical side. I've always loved all of that. And, even when I wasn't on the radio myself, I was still broadcasting illegally around the neighborhood. So I did all of that. All I would say is that whatever your skills or your interest as an aspiring broadcaster, just go with the flow and just try and build as much skill as you can, because at the end of the day, these new radio stations that are coming up now, they need people who are self-sufficient to be able to produce programs from home, to have an understanding of the technology, to understand what a bit rate is on a WAV file, for example, to maybe have an understanding as to how to promote your show on social media, how to use hashtags on Twitter. There's so many different facets to the modern digital jock, how to install software that would enable you to play 2 or 3 music tracks at once, a playout system, how to configure your PC so that you can play multiple music tracks at the same time, and maybe have some basic fader material so that you can actually fade things in and out, and learn how to use the microphone. There are so many things. I mean, you could write a book about it, and people have, obviously, but there's a lot to learn. It sounds easy because there are people out there that do it really well. And that's just like anything, isn't it? Anything looks or sounds easy when it's done expertly, but when you actually get down to it yourself, it can be a lot harder. So I would just say, learn as much as you can, ask as many questions of people who are doing what you would love to do. So latch onto somebody who is delivering the way that you think you would deliver and doing the kind of shows that you would like to do. And then just learn all the way. The beauty of today's market, though, is that there are many, many stations to get your teeth into. And I think that once you've got a basic setup, or even maybe a community station like you're part of, Ben, where you can actually go somewhere where they've got studio equipment, then that's even better, really, because somebody else is taking care of that part of it. And now you can just concentrate on your style, your technique, and the kind of radio that you want to present. And then when you're ready, you can just do that from home somewhere and have a basic setup there as well.
Yeah, and I'd also say, for example, if there was a radio station that offered that I wanted my services, but I couldn't be bothered to go to their studios, not in this area, but in a different area, I'd do my studio setup from here, you see.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is with me, I'm really comfortable with the studio setup that I have. So, you know, I know which faders to use to present certain programs that require different bits of input, whether it be on CD or turntable or all of the 4 cart machines that are on my screen. You know, if I go to another studio somewhere, I've got to learn that from scratch pretty much. And, you know, when you, as you know, when you operate a mixing desk, it's a bit like driving a car. You're not, after a while, you're not really conscious of the faders that you're pulling up and pushing down again, because you're listening to what's going on in your headphones and you're adjusting your hands and your fingers to compensate for that, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah, and also it's brilliant as well.
That's a real satisfaction. No, for me, just as a parting shot, you know, there's a real satisfaction when you get listeners come to you and they say, you know, you got me through lockdown. You know, I lost a good friend, and you were there on the radio, or your music picks me up, or you make me smile in the morning. You know, any feedback like that, it's just worth its weight, because it just says to you, I'm doing something right. I'm doing something that's of use to somebody somewhere, and I treasure that.
Brilliant. Right, Paul, that's it for today. Thank you very much for joining us, Paul, today.
It's been my pleasure, Ben. Thank you for wheedling me out amongst the leg ends.
Do join me again soon for another Chatterbox podcast. But for now, please give it up for Paul Newman. Thank you very much for listening. And that's a wrap.
Hello everyone, welcome to another podcast. Me, Ben Lister, here yet again. Just a quick update. This is my interview with Paul Newman, episode 32 of the Chatbox podcast, so here it is.